Hello, and welcome to another episode of AppleInsider Podcast. Wow, I just did an Apple there. I took the article out, threw it out with everything else. It is the AppleInsider Podcast. Got to say the whole thing. And our sponsor this week is Oracle. William, you're hanging out over there pretty quiet. What do you have to say about Glow Time?
Half the day I'm counting the minutes, and the rest half the day I'm actually counting the money, thinking, how much am I going to have to spend? What am I likely to get as a trade-in? Should I wait till next year? I keep looping around all this, and then I meet my accountant, and she goes, yeah, I'd wait, frankly, William, just a little bit. That's what I'm doing.
Treading the balance between pleasing the accountant, pleasing the wife, and making sure it all works out.
It's a serious issue this time. I think because I think I benefited from skipping the 14. Yeah, I went 13 to 15, and I felt like I got a lot for it. I want to go to the 16, but if there's not quite enough, I could easily wait to the 17. I'm right on the edge with it.
Well, see, here I am throwing out the whole regular playbook with Apple Insider. See, Apple did that to us too. Nobody knows what's going on. The event is on a Monday. You know, cats and dogs are living together. It's just, it's a wild week. But I did want to say this week's Apple Insider Apple Insider Plus will be about our favorite or, most memorable Apple events. We're going to get into that a little bit. Just talking about, of course, I'm sure a couple with Steve Jobs might appear or maybe some more recent ones. I will say that October one, that was interesting. Well, we will get into it. But in any case, let's dive right into the show.
Cool.
Well, last week we talked a little bit about Glow Time. I think we discussed a little bit more of the iPhone side of the rumors. There's a few more things popping up this week, but this time about Apple Watch. Now, I gotta say, the source of these rumors, I don't really care for. I've said it before. We cover all the rumors because we have a grading system, which is good. We're able to say possible. But now we've ran into a problem with the grading system because even if the rumor person isn't ideal, they can still be saying something that makes sense, so they can still get a good score. It's a whole thing. Maybe we need to come up with a scoring system for the rumor person themselves. But Majin Buu, they're a character, and William, I don't know if you know this, but basically their whole deal is they lurk on Weibo and forums and look for plausible rumors and just post them at large. Now, they might actually have some sort of Apple contact because there has been a few exclusives from them, so I'm not taking that away, but they also want to fill in the traffic, so like it's almost daily that they're posting. This is an engagement type character, not so much I remember Loves to Dream was one of the people we followed, and they only posted when they had new exclusive information, whereas Majin Buu's very much engagement bait. It's every time they find something on the internet with no attribution, of course. You can usually reverse image search a lot of this stuff and find the original Weibo post. You have to take it with a grain of salt, especially with this character, and here they are contradicting themselves with two different rumors. What can you tell me, William? You wrote this one.
Well, I'm very keen on the Apple Watch, so I was kind of alert to any news about this. And this guy, well, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, Majin Buu said flat out, certain, proof, definite, this is going on with the Apple Watch. And 1 hour later said definite, absolute proof, totally the opposite. In this case, it was to do with... I can't believe I hadn't really noticed this, but the Apple Watch Ultra has a very flat screen, and the Apple Watch proper, for want of a better phrase, is curved at the edges. And so I can't remember which way around it was, but I think first it was definite proof going to be flat, and then definite proof still going to be curved, and things like this. He did throw in a lot of other detail, and we covered it because it was worth pointing out. It was fun pointing out the discrepancy, but also there was lots of other things that, what you said, that it seemed to slightly tie in with other things we've heard, so they seemed plausible enough to mention.
I'm going to disagree with their assessment on sizes. So Apple Watch Ultra is 49 millimeters, correct?
Yes.
Up till now, it sounded like the Series 10 would be getting closer to that, but this report says 46 millimeters on the upper end, which is only a 1 millimeter increase. I can see Apple ticking that up ever so slightly, but if they're going a little flatter and wider, I could imagine them going for a larger display, especially if it's a lighter device. Because maybe Ultra, correct me if I'm wrong, it appears to be selling really well, only because people like huge watches. They don't care. They're not going hiking. They're not going diving. They're not going to space. They just want the biggest watch that they can get. So it kind of made sense to me that the Apple Watch Ultra, or the Apple Watch Series 10, could get a even larger face, closer to the Ultra, just without all the Ultra things and with a bit of a lower price tag. And then the problem is then the lower end model, the smaller model, is now getting ever so slightly bigger. Now, at 42 to 43 millimeters, it's basically the size of the original large Apple Watch. But funny enough, it seems Apple's okay with that. I mean, people would always say, and this is, there's always kind of a catch to this, right? It's an assumption, a wide blanket statement, but people would say that the smaller watch was more feminine. It's for smaller wrists, that kind of thing. A lot of people have smaller wrists. It can be for anybody, but that's just kind of the idea. And like Joanna Stern, I believe it was one of those, or Christina Warren. I don't know why, but I always get them confused. They're very different people, but they say a lot of the same things. But in any case, one of them reported, I believe it was Joanna Stern with the Wall Street Journal, saying no other smartwatch maker has a quote-unquote female size or a feminine or small size. That's why so many people flock to Apple Watch, because it has that smaller size. And if Apple erodes that, I wonder if that's going to be a problem.
That's interesting, because I didn't know that she'd said that, but women's clothing and apparel is shockingly poor. I can't give away company names. I'm trying to think of a way to say this. I am aware of someone who works in a company where they have to have PPE. I can't remember what the first P is. Personal protective equipment, something like that. And if you're a man in that company, doddle. Fat, tall, thin, right, whatever shape you are, as long as you're a man, easy, you can have it. But for women, I think it might have been 2 years it took to get the safety boots that we needed for it.
Goodness.
So the fact that Apple is doing this and it is benefiting women as well as anybody with narrow wrists, that's a good thing. And I actually didn't appreciate that other smart watches don't do that. That's rubbish of them.
Right.
Good on Apple.
It's... Yeah. I wonder if maybe the Apple Watch SE could continue to be at that smaller size, or it could. There's always been some rumor that a third watch could be introduced, where it's basically not the Apple Watch SE; it's just a smaller version of the Apple Watch, going back to 40 millimeters or something like that. I don't know. We'll see what Apple does. The iPhone 17 Slim kind of evokes the same concept. We're just kind of going backwards and forwards based on consumer demand.
Joe, I've realised I can't remember what Apple does with old Apple Watches, because with the iPhone they ditch the Pro models, but last year's regular models stay on sale at a lower price. Do they? If they do the same with Apple Watches, then they could afford, I suppose, to grow both sides of watches, knowing that the smaller one was still available at least for a year.
This is dangerous territory, so don't take what I'm saying the wrong way. Believe me, because I'm not one to stereotype things, but the danger I think Apple's going to run into here is if they're making a lot of their decisions based on how devices sell, and men primarily buy technology. Men are more likely to buy a smart watch, right? Not to say, like I said, women don't buy these things. Obviously they do, but for whatever reason, it tends to lean into that sphere. Men are more likely to buy these things, so maybe they're more likely to buy the larger devices. Do you think that maybe if they're looking at this user data, that they can tick up the size without because it's a demand-based metric, that maybe they're edging out, even though it's a smaller population, they're edging out an entire demographic doing this way? I think Apple's smarter than that. So, again, I guess we'll just have to see how they handle this, but it's inevitable the Apple Watch is going to get bigger. I wonder if eventually the casing will start to bend itself as well and become more of a band than a pebble, right? as it wraps around the wrist almost, or could get longer in the other dimension. It's hard to say. It's just everyone wants bigger screens, and at some point you got to assume the Apple Watch display is going to be redundant with the iPhone. There has to be a limit, just like there has to be a limit with the iPhone. We talked about this last week. How big is too big? If we get up to 6.9 inches, we're very quickly getting to the 7-inch territory. My goodness, it's almost an iPad at that point, right? So something's got to give. You can't get bigger forever, but maybe augmented reality is the answer. I don't know.
I don't really fancy putting on a pair of glasses to look at my wrist for it, but I could see that happening. So we're talking about the screen size as being really the only thing in the Ultra's favour, because all of the hardware stuff, I'm with you. Most people who buy it, it seems, anecdotal evidence, are not people who need hard-wearing, hiking, capable things. They like the bigger screen, but they also like the significantly greater battery life.
Right.
If Apple manages to make a larger screen for the regular one, does it follow that the case has to be bigger so the battery can be bigger? And then what's the difference between the regular and the Ultra version?
If the rumor is the case is going to get bigger but flatter, which would actually give us almost identical battery life, which would in turn mean the Ultra continues to be a beneficial purchase for those who want battery life above all else. Like, screen size is a metric, but battery life too. And you don't even have to think about battery life with the Ultra. You can go a couple days without even putting it on a charger. I don't know. It's Apple's job here to pitch these things to us as they grow and get bigger. They can't just throw it out there and say, now it's bigger, deal with it. I think they have a story to tell, and especially with the smaller size, I think it's critical that they explain why it's getting bigger and what customers who prefer a smaller screen are going to be able to do. I know that's contradictory because they kind of abandoned the smaller iPhone, but I think the market kind of proved, outside of a very small niche, the smaller iPhone's not necessary, at least until the the iPhone SE comes out and it's an ever so slightly smaller display with Face ID. Maybe that could be a indication. Maybe a bunch of people buy that thing up and it kind of blows up because of the price and the size.
You don't think the market has kind of pushed the watch to be bigger in the same way?
Well, like I said, it's funny because, well, with the phone, everyone buys a phone. It's a guarantee. Everyone's going to buy a smartphone. They need them in today's world. It's very rare to find someone without some sort of smartphone. So I think the demographics are a little more equally weighted, right? Because if you take the total population of Earth, it's pretty much 50-50, whatever male, female, presentation, whatever, what have you. So your preferences are going to skew one way or the other, but it's still generally split down the middle. But if you take a niche of a population, it's going to weigh one way or the other. And the way I see jewelry, like an Apple Watch, it being technology, there's a good chance it's going to skew more masculine. And that's why I would be afraid of looking at that data as a corollary to what consumers want, because if it's skewing masculine already, then it's going to skew larger and could eliminate the smaller demographic who still wants a smartwatch but has maybe a smaller wrist or prefers the smaller display, but they're just not a large representation of that pool, because again, not everyone needs a smartwatch, so you're already carving out a niche, and when you do that, you automatically introduce variables that aren't present in the total population of humanity, right?
I see what you mean. Right. But let's say the screen is bigger and the battery life is better. Is that enough to count as a 10th anniversary redesign, do you think?
So, I never bought this Apple Watch Series X, Series 10 rumor of we're going to get this radical thing. Apple could celebrate the anniversary, but to be fair, they also didn't exactly celebrate the anniversary of the iPhone 10 on the same way. They skipped 9 altogether. That's also because of naming conventions, and they had these series, the S series phones, kind of warped that a little bit. So, correct me if I'm wrong. The Series 10, the Apple Watch, or I did it again. The iPhone 10 came out on the 10th anniversary of iPhone, correct?
Pretty much. It came out at the same time as the iPhone 8. And I remember thinking, what a ridiculous thing to do, to announce this great new iPhone. And by the way, forget that. Here's this great new iPhone as well. But, well, I was going to say it worked. I got the impression the iPhone 10 was an experiment because it was the first one to cost over £1,000 or $1,000. And I remember thinking, if that one sells, iPhones will never go below 1,000 again. And unfortunately, it sold. Yeah.
No, it was a very popular. I did wonder if Apple was going to break their playbook a little bit and start having more experimental phones at the top end, and turns out that that was not true. They do add more features there, but they're never what you would call experimental or different. They're the only radical departure that we've ever seen is the iPhone 10, and that's why people call it out. So, Apple Watch Series 10, could it be? And I don't think so. It's such a mature category. The only thing we're going to see now is refinements to the current design or a radical redesign. And if they're going to do this radical redesign, I think it would be a separate product, right? This is what we were talking about before. The Ultra could have been that, but they would have had to wait 2 more years to do it. I think the issue is we have the Series 10 in 2 sizes. We have the Ultra. Adding in a Series X on top of that, I don't know. It's just, I understand, like, if you look at the iPad lineup, there's 6 different SKUs, right? So it's not like it's going to be a SKU issue. I don't know. I wonder what Apple's strategy is here. And funny enough, because of Apple Watch and how it's made, it seems like we get very few rumors, and they're usually wrong. Like, I mean, we remember the flat-sided Apple Watch. Turns out that was maybe the Ultra, but even then that was wrong. I think it was just totally made up. Because you can guess at things all day. You can look at the current design and guess a trajectory.
I so clearly remember seeing those. Would it have been... I think we saw it both for the 8 and the 9, and it was such an ugly design. I thought it was a brilliant advert for buying the Series 7 instead, while you still could. But now you've said that, actually, I suppose the Ultra is at least similar. And I don't find the Ultra ugly. I find it too chunky for me, but I don't find it...
It's utilitarian.
Unattractive. Yeah. Whereas the designs we saw those couple of years running were definitely, well, fan art, I think is what we can say at the moment. Is that a phrase?
It was the John Prosser era, and as we know, something happened in his leak line that fed him a lot of wrong information, and that's what I think led to him ultimately leaving the Apple rumor sphere. That people are just very unforgiving. So once you make a couple of big fumbles like that, you probably just gotta exit gracefully. And now he's making like documentaries, so he landed on his feet, so that's fine. But in any case, anything else on Glow Time? We've talked a lot about Apple Watch Series 10, but there's a new rumor. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I just think it's curious to talk about the Apple Watch when it is so clearly an iPhone event, but
they'll always
like
be in pairs.
Well, there's no question at the start it had to be, because they are technically linked, or they were more than they are now. But also, Apple Watch on its own, I don't think would get the attention. The iPhone is like a spotlight on certain things, and Apple's very careful how it spends that spotlight for it. And I think the Apple Watch, I mean, it's 10 years now. Are they always going to do it, or can they now break it off to something else and put something else in that needs attention? And I don't know what that something else would be.
It might be controversial, but I quite liked that weird COVID year that Apple had 6 events in a row or something. Like, honestly, fine. Do multiple 30-minute events at the end of the year announcing, here's the iPhone, here's the Apple Watch, here's the iPad, here's the Mac. Like, I know it's awful for us because there's so much to do, but at the same time, I think it also lets Apple literally take over like 4 months of the year, and I think they like that. I don't know. I can see this going many different ways, but I want to talk about iPhone 16 and the capture button. There's been a lot of information kind of over the last couple weeks. Anyone paying attention, if you get emails from case makers, none of this is going to be embargoed information. Like, this is stuff you can see on different websites. Companies have mistakenly uploaded different images on their retail pages and then taken them down or changed them. I saw some company tweeted out a picture with a cutout, and then someone pointed it out, and then it got deleted and changed shortly after. So this keeps happening, And of course, none of the case makers really know. Maybe one, like usually, like I don't know, Belkin or something gets maybe a hint from Apple. There's partners very close with Apple, but most of these case makers, there's hundreds of them, know nothing, and they have to go off of the dummy cases that went out. And the dummies this year had a capture button on every iPhone. So many of these manufacturers seem to be making cutouts for these capture buttons because it's supposed to be capacitive. You need your finger to be able to reach it. But that might not be the case.
Oh, see what you did there? Might not be the case. Okay, right. Yes, I don't understand it. It seemed to me, because I don't use a case, so I don't pay a lot of attention to cases. I like a raw iPhone. I've only broken in one, so I'm okay with this. But it seemed to me, from kind of passing glances, that we would hear a rumour that there was definitely going to be a capture button because here it is on the case, and there definitely wasn't going to be a capture button because it wasn't on this case. And now the latest rumour is that there's a reason for all of that, which is that case manufacturers, other than Apple, are including a cutout for it, and Apple is not, because the button will work anyway. You said capacitive, and that does mean you've got to touch it with your finger, but somehow Apple's one, you'll be able to press on the side of the case where the button is, and it will do its thing. I think you can hear increasing incredulity in my voice there, because how do I know? You're far more a materials guy than I am. You might know whether the physics are possible, but I also I look at the optics of it, and here's a new button and you've just hidden it in a case. How am I as a user supposed to kind of get the muscle memory to remember where it is if I slap a case on it in the first day? It's like, it's a great new feature that you'll never see again. So I struggle to believe this, but do you know, is it possible that you could press on the side? Actually, sorry, no, one more thing. There is a related patent that just was revealed in the last couple of weeks, where Apple is at least researching cases that effectively have buttons on them. You put the phone in the case and the phone's buttons are disabled, the case's buttons are enabled, and there's no physical connection, but as you press the button on the case, it informs the iPhone of what you've done and the iPhone reacts. It doesn't feel like this is what's going to be happening here, but no. Is this the kind of thing that's going on? Can this be true?
Well, if it's capacitive, it needs to be touched. So throw that out the window. But there are other options. There could be no button at all, William.
No capture button?
Here's the thing. Do you remember, or not even remember, it's all very recent, some of these Android phones, you can squeeze to make it summon Bixby or whatever, right? Like, there's no button. You just squeeze the sides of the phone.
I did not know that.
There's a few phones with this feature. Yeah. I could imagine there being a Surface. There would probably still be some sort of cutout. This is where the capacitive rumor comes in. That's why it's maybe getting confused. But there could be some sort of implementation on the side of the phone that allows it to be force sensitive. Do you remember 3D Touch?
Oh, yes, I do. Okay.
Now do that on the side of the phone. So it would need to cross a threshold, right? So if your finger grazes over the surface, maybe it wouldn't be enough. But if it detects that your hand is there's a slight pressure, and you're scrolling up or down, it would know that you're intentionally trying to scroll. Or if you press in harder, it would cross a threshold and detect that you're pressing halfway or all the way. It would have a wide range of basically frequency response of like how hard you're pressing into this area. And because of that, as long as the cases were built to adapt to that, then you could theoretically cover that section of the phone with a case and not need a cutout because it's not technically capacitive. If it was capacitive, you would need a conducting material on top of that button that you could press through the case, but that would cause a lot of issues because maybe the contact surface wouldn't be that great. Maybe the material's not passing your conductiveness enough, right? You're going to run into false positives. I think the force measure of this might actually be a better use case.
Does it not just seem odd, though? How would your Apple, and here's your new phone, look at it, everybody, this is wonderful. We have all of these physical buttons, the action button from last year, for example, and this one that's a button, but it isn't a button. Is that right? I could see them all going that way, or none going that way, but just having one.
I think
seems
because
odd.
capacitive or not, force touch or not, I think Apple. This is the problem with Apple's secrecy. Obviously, it's unnecessary for anyone to know now, except maybe case manufacturers, because everything depends on mass production, and you can't start that on September 20th. You have to start that, in July. So, yeah, it's a real tough thing, and that's why Apple's partners, the ones that do maybe know, if there are any, because there may not be, are already preparing for this on top secret detail. But to think that nothing's leaked out tells us maybe no one knows. And I think the thing with these kinds of features that are completely new paradigms, like the dynamic island or the notch, the action button, we can only guess at their functionality beforehand, and sometimes we get more info, sometimes less. But the problem is, what I'm getting at, is nobody knows except Apple. And when they release that phone, they'll release a line of cases. And what those cases show, probably going to have like a capture area that's like a, please press here. It'll probably have a unique design. And then everyone else will have to copy that because Apple will set the stage, and then everyone else will have to follow. That's terrible for case makers, but that's just the reality we live in. It only happens once. Every generation from now on that gets the capture button will have this area. They'll know how to tackle it. It's just this first initial launch, maybe wait on buying a case until October, November when they know what they're doing. Because
definitely, yes.
The initial case run just is not going to be what you think it's going to be.
That's a tough business to be in, case making. I mean,
for a secret company.
Yeah. If you get it right, then it must be worth it, or they wouldn't keep doing it. But the odds of getting every detail right, it just seems impossible.
It used to be that you would be the only one with a cutout, and no one else did it because they kind of just made last year's case for this year's phone dimensions. And then you would be the only one or one of three that actually had the things that took advantage of the new feature. That stopped being the case because everyone just started making the adjustment and making up for it in volume, basically. They would recall it, melt all the materials down, and try again. And I guess they deemed that fine financially. These larger companies, a lot of them have enough money to just burn, and maybe the ones that they can't redistribute, they put onto cheap, shelves and say, here's a discount, go get your discounted iPhone cases, or they send it back, put a plug in the hole that they created, and then they, there's many different ways this could work. Maybe all the hole cutouts, they'll ship everyone complimentary plugs that you put in there. I don't know. It's just, it is a tough business to be in, but I wouldn't read too much into this. We'll see what Apple announces. We only have a couple more days.
Actually, you're much more of a photographer than I am. I'm kind of a video guy more than stills. Do you want a capture button?
I find it fascinating. More controls, the better. Physical controls. But the funny thing is not much has been discussed about this, but there's probably uses outside of photography. It could be a camera launcher, right? So it could just, you press hard into the side of that, or maybe it's a press and hold, kind of like the action button, and then it auto launches the camera no matter where you are in the system, or even if the phone is locked. You press and hold that, you're in photography mode. That's interesting, but also you could just scroll web pages with that. You're right.
Yeah.
It could become a new button for a game, or there's just many ways. It's just another control on the side of the phone. Now, when you're in the camera app, it's going to be great for precise controls. If we get a variable aperture, it'll be amazing for dialing in your focus. Like, there's so many ways that this could work. Or even if it's not a variable aperture lens, it could be a variable aperture portrait mode. Imagine a live portrait mode where you see the effect being applied, and then you could dial in how much of your effect you're going to have, right? There's so many ways that this could be used. I like the idea. I can't wait to see how it's executed, because I think this is clever.
This episode is brought to you by Oracle. AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is AI needs a lot of speed and processing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8 and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/AppleInsider. That's oracle.com/AppleInsider. So just once again, Oracle, ORACLE.com/AppleInsider. And thanks to Oracle for supporting the Apple Insider podcast. Do you use the action button?
Good question. I forget a lot that it's there. It does have a good utility. I have it mapped to a folder, and every now and then I have to remind myself to press it, and it's like, oh yeah, I have all these actions available to me. Throughout the last year, I've traded out different functions. I've used it. It's just, it's learning a whole new paradigm, and I feel like I'm getting into the groove. A year in, I'm realizing it's there more often and I'm actually utilizing it. It's just like that initial rush of, wow, there's an action button, this is cool, let's play with it. Then it kind of falls off, and then you start ticking back in like, oh yeah, there's a button here, until finally now I think here we are. I think this is just a natural progression with a lot of these new features. As we're getting to the next phone, which will also have an action button, I'm kind of starting to muscle memory the fact that it's there, and I'm enjoying it. I like it.
When I press it, I have 8 or 10 things that pop up, and I realise I only use one of them. The one at the top, a particular thing I do a lot. I still, a year in, I like the idea, but it's the wrong way round. You mentioned having to press and hold it. If you don't, it's still the case. If you just press the action button, it says to you, press and hold something. So it registers the press. It right. should do something there, rather than the extra beat to wait for what? To make sure that I really meant it. Well, yeah, I really meant it. Yeah.
It's not that much of a disruption to see that little text pop up like, oops, I pressed it. But imagine if you accidentally pressed it and every time a whole menu popped up. That would be pretty disruptive.
You see, I'd be all right with that. I think I'd learn to use it rather than the same one thing I do. I don't know how I ended up doing this, but I've also made it a widget on the Today screen, and I found it's fractionally faster to just swipe to the Today screen and tap the button there, and it wouldn't be if it were the right way around on the button.
Sometimes I dearly wish I could travel back in time and re-experience the slow creep of features as they were added in, and truly design my devices with each new edition, because now today it's just like, oh yeah, just factory reset and start over. It's like, that's fine, but then you have to set up everything from scratch. Yes. And imagine, just right now, delete your entire shortcuts library, delete every app you've ever installed, delete everything, all of the databases, all of the files, app, everything. Just get rid of all of it. Start from new. How much do you as a person have to configure? Like, imagine right now you've been a Windows Android user for the last forever, and you're switching to iPhone and you're setting up every individual feature from scratch. You would spend a week. You'd have to take off work and not sleep. It's a lot. There's a lot going on iPhone these days, and I like the idea of going cold and just trying to reconfigure everything, just because I kind of want to reteach myself all of the features, because it feels like once you start using 4 or 5 of them, the rest kind of drop off to the background. You forget about SharePlay. You forget about different things that can actually be useful in your day-to-day life. And I want that new brain again, that excitement of seeing it at that keynote being announced and thinking, wow, I can use that. And then it kind of going away to the things that you use regularly, right?
It's sometimes hard to add in anything. But you mentioned shortcuts there, and as it happens, I've got the shortcuts up on my screen, so I can tell you I have 528 shortcuts. and I probably only use about 20 of them now. But yeah, I kind of create them to fix a problem, and then the problem is fixed. But yes, the idea of starting all that over again. Though I had to do a thing on an Android phone the other day. I had to install an app for somebody, and I installed it. Fine, I figured out the Google Play Store, and it's not that different to the App Store, and there it was, downloaded. But could I find that app on the Android phone afterwards? Right now, I mean, the person I did it for obviously isn't that familiar, or they wouldn't have asked me to do it either. But you thought between the two of us, there was a screen full of apps, and she swiped up and there was a different screen of apps, and it was on there. And I don't know what the difference is. So I'm assuming somebody coming to the iPhone would have similar problems. Like when I go between PC and Macs, where files are saved and downloaded and things, keeps throwing me for it. So it's like this base level of things that I think when you're in the platform you don't realise are a barrier. So there's that, plus everything you said of the shortcuts, the settings. Everybody should just stay where they are as long as they're happy. Okay.
If we know one thing that Microsoft is good at, though, it's gaming, right?
Well, yeah. I have friends who loathe Apple. I mean, to the point of neck muscle twitching hatred for Apple. And when you ask why, I mean, I don't hate Windows. I wouldn't use it, but I don't throb when it's going on. And it always comes down to that they're gamers. I mean, it's a very small, I'm not saying it's scientifically accurate or statistically valid selection, but every time it's happened to me, the person's been a gamer because PCs, Microsoft, ace for games, Apple, rubbish. And I did believe that was true, but there's something in your voice there that makes you think, no.
This is a long and storied history that I think the listeners will know. If you're a gamer, you know very well. Games have always been Windows. There was a time when Halo was announced as a title for the Mac, and then Microsoft bought it, right? And then that basically was the beginning of the end, right? We had a very brief moment where Apple was trying to pretend they were serious about gaming. They released a game console that utterly failed, and then
the Pippin.
Right.
Yes. Was it the Pippin? That's come out of my head from long ago. Oh goodness. Okay. I never even saw one in the flesh, but
yeah, it's a funny looking console. I would love to have one to put on a shelf, but I'm sure they cost $1 million. The thing is,
another thing to put on your shelf next to your Mac that you hardly ever use. This is a terrible shelf you've got there.
Equal weight, I think, between the Pippin and my MacBook Pro.
In
usefulness.
This to me.
No, the Pippin though, I think its biggest failure was just competition and the controllers and the implementation. It was just a bad move. Don't do it. The almost as bad a move as the Mac TV. In any case,
no. Funny thing about the Mac, I keep hearing about Mac TV was terrible, it was awful. I actually had one. Apple, I think the numbering was different here in the UK to the States because I never see the model name I had, and I've forgotten it now. But I was actually working on a magazine, and Apple gave me an Apple with a Mac with a TV in it, and it was my only TV for about a year when I was living in this tiny little flat in London, and it could record things, and it was, there was a weird thing that it was stereo when you were watching live terrestrial television, but then if you record it and played it back, it was in mono. So that was if the phone rang in the middle of a film, you noticed it afterwards. But other than that, I thought it was underrated, really. I'm not the only one. Sorry.
What I find funny about gaming history, just in general, is how gaming began as a computer-based system, and then we had this kind of schism where console, quote unquote, but people forget that game consoles are just computers, right? They're just prepackaged and set to a specific spec, and you buy it at a set price, whereas computers, PCs, you could configure to whatever you need and then overclock those games and make them run better, and then cheat your way out of many multiplayer games because you just had a better running. You could overclock the system, run it at 2x, and kill everyone. Once okay. We figured that out pretty quickly and kind of shut that down. I'm thinking back to the name is escaping me, but
Well,
Unreal
it's not.
Tournament,
Oh, right.
like
It's definitely not chess or Sudoku. That's kind of my area of this. But
yeah,
okay,
overclocking your Mac actually let you take 2 turns instead of one
there you
every
go.
chess game. There you go.
Alice chess would be yeah. Okay, right. All right. But there you are. You
So
basically confessed to cheating
of
in your
course,
wild youth. Okay.
yeah, the 90s, when I was 6. But the thing
Right.
is, it evolved quickly, right? I'm going to skip over a whole thing. We had the Sega and all that stuff. Right. Home consoles were about bringing the arcade to your home. That was kind of the initial pitch. And then when you bought a PC and could configure it, you could play big boy games, right? That was kind of like the divestment there. You got a keyboard or a controller, and you would play these shooters. And you play like Doom and stuff. And as consoles got better and were able to play more of these games, it was always a back and forth. Is PC better? Is console better? It was the early days of these kinds of wars. Apple was there with everyone else, but they never seemed to get the titles. For whatever reason, Microsoft just did really well initially with their platforms and made gaming happen. I understand that Mac was kind of more or less first to it. They just dropped the ball. Then you get to the 2000s, consoles are everywhere. Everyone's buying them. More people own PlayStations than DVD players. And then the Mac is basically just like, you know what? We're a work machine. We're serious. We don't really care. And from that point onward, especially after the Pippin, once we get back to Steve Jobs returning, gaming just wasn't a priority. And Microsoft stepped in and said, with our systems, we are widely compatible with different GPU options. You can build whatever you need, or you can buy an Xbox and just play a pre-configured console. And that is when the gaming industry boom really took off, right? That we went from having, I think, in the year 2000, I think you could count in the up to 10,000 games total in the world, and then from 2000 to 2010, there's now just a near infinite number of games, right? The industry exploded. And where did it explode? On console and PC, because that's where the architecture was, that's where the developers were, the toolkits, and Apple just ignored all of it until the iPhone and the App Store, and now Apple is the biggest technically gaming monolith on the planet when you look at iPhone. It's a weird thing to say, but it's true. The Mac, though, for the last forever, has just basically fallen off a cliff. If you want to play a game on a computer, you go buy a PC, a graphics card, maybe an external GPU if you want to upgrade an existing setup, and it all works. And Steam is set up for it. There's just an ungodly number of games on Steam you can play, and they most of them run on modern hardware. Now you enter Apple, transitioning from Intel. Well, before, you could buy an Intel Mac, hook up an external GPU, and maybe run Destiny at a decent frame rate. It would work. Then Apple moved to ARM. And now ARM, being a completely different architecture, needs a translation layer, taking away from the overall spec of the chipset, right? You're part of the game. Part of what the computer is running is no longer the game. There's some overhead to getting that game running. And on top of that, even translation isn't enough, and the game just isn't going to run well on Mac. So running x86 Steam just was an impossibility, more or less, and you chopped off much of the gaming market from the Mac completely. And that's why in these last few years you've been hearing about the new gaming kits and how Apple's going to help developers translate their games from one industry to the other. But there's no industry here. And it seems like there's no money here. You see a game like Resident Evil come to Mac, and it sell almost nothing. I mean, to be fair, it was an old game when it released, and everyone had already played it, so maybe that played a part in it. We're also not seeing anyone say, "Let's bring the next Call of Duty. Let's bring the next huge AAA title exclusively, or not exclusively at least, but day and date to Mac as PC and see how it competes." But I can guarantee you, even then, the PC would destroy because of their x86 Intel, because of their ability to use NVIDIA GPUs. All of these things play into it. So finally, I know I've been going on a thing here. We've landed in this world where just people hate Mac, right? There's this gamer space where everyone just looks at the Mac and says, this isn't for gaming, I can't use it. I must own a PC. For me, I would always recommend, if you're a Mac user, buy a console. PlayStation 5, going to run everything you could want outside of a lot of those indie titles. If you really want to play those indie titles, then sure, go get a dedicated gaming PC. But that's the answer. I can't tell you, sure, download Steam on Mac and play those indie games, because you can't. And that's where we've landed. But now, throw another screw into this, Windows is transitioning to ARM, kind of. And what do you know about this in the last couple of years? We've seen Windows ARM. What is that about?
What's it called? Windows RT, something like that. A very, very long time ago.
Circa 2012, 2013.
Goodness, as long as that. Funny enough, that's when I left RT, Radio Times. And shortly afterwards, I was interviewed by RT, Russia Today, for a thing. So RT stuck in my mind, but I don't know which one applies to which. But all that time ago, it looked like Microsoft was going to do what Apple's done so successfully and move processors, and then it just kind of didn't happen. No, because there would be Windows out that wouldn't run Windows apps or things, and I might see that as a benefit, but others didn't. Is that not all over now? Are they not just carrying on with Intel like they always did?
Well, so this is getting into uncharted territory. Like, why is Microsoft transitioning away from Intel? It's just it's the low energy consumption, high output style of ARM, right? Apple Silicon, when Apple came out with the M1 chip, we saw what happened, and the just leaps and bounds of performance, and single core and sometimes multi-core, maybe not so much GPU, because again, you can't do the NVIDIA GPUs on Mac or on ARM anyway. So a lot of complications here. Windows needs to get to the next generation of chips. You know, Intel is stuck at something like, I can't remember anymore. It's a high nanometer, 17 nanometers or something. Apple's at 3, right, computationally, and the just Intel platform is kind of falling apart. And eventually Windows is going to need to be on ARM, but there's a problem, because the industry runs on Intel. The industry, like gaming and everything, runs on this thing. So now Microsoft is split. If you buy a Copilot Plus PC with ARM, it's no longer, you can't game on it. There's nothing there, just like there's nothing on Apple, because everything runs on that x86. So Microsoft is selling gaming computers with Intel, and the quote-unquote future of computing, Copilot Plus ARM. And it's a rift right down the middle, and I'm not sure what the answer is right now, but I think we're going to see something. There was something happened a few years ago in the console era. PlayStation 3 was weirdly a different architecture completely than PS2, and PS4, actually, the one that came after it. PS3 just did its own thing, and then they shifted back to a different architecture on PS4. So even today, unless it has been completely rewritten to run on the newer consoles, you still cannot play PS3 games on PS4 or PS5. It just completely, when you bought a PlayStation 4, you abandoned your entire gaming library. It was very controversial at the time.
I missed all of that. Okay.
Yeah, we could see a similar situation. It could be catastrophic. It's hard to say. Because honestly, PC, I'm a console gamer, so I follow a lot of the console news. I'm not up to date on PC stuff, so if I've said anything incorrect or odd, that's why. Like, I understand the situation, but also it's not my front page news every day or anything. But I think the issue that we're going to run into here is we might see a couple of generations where people are going to have to make the decision to abandon basically what they had before, and a major shift from developers. But the problem is, in order for ARM gaming to succeed, is the developers have to be incentivized. And we're seeing this slow shift, right? The new Assassin's Creed launching day and day on everything is a good sign. But this transition is going to take a long time. But I think ultimately we could see a future where ARM is the gaming platform and Windows will reemerge likely as the gaming monolith. But Apple has an opportunity, because as Windows is scrambling to fix this hole and maybe have a translation layer allowing Intel to play on ARM, well, that means Mac will be able to take advantage of that as well. But the problem is we will always have the same disadvantage we had before, is certain GPUs and external GPUs and stuff like that will not work, or these certain graphics cards. You buy a Mac Pro Tower today, you cannot put an external graphics card in it, right? So Apple will have to address these issues, but that's why I think now more than ever, Apple could actually emerge as a true gaming titan if they take the right steps, but I don't know that they will.
It's interesting that I think traditionally Apple, I think you've said this in the past, every now and again Apple says, no, we're serious about gaming, and then nothing
They've said
happens.
that about 6 times in their history.
I have the impression that Windows users are much harder to move on, because over the years there have been various, I think the move to, was it Windows, there was a big change in Windows, and I don't know that it...
Vista to 7
Vista
to
to
10
7,
to
yes.
11.
A lot
Honestly,
of resistance to that.
Every one of those transitions were awful. All of them. It's kind of impressive that they had so many in a row. But going from Vista to 7 was just catastrophic. 7 to 8 with the touch-focused UI layer. I can go on. People remember that very well. When I was in the military from 2009 to 2019, and that entire time we were still transitioning out of Windows XP to Win. So,
right. Okay.
Yeah, and by the time I got out, we were just doing the updates to Windows 10, which was impressive. But you got to imagine moving to Windows 10 in 2019. From some of the computers were upgrading to Windows 10 from Windows 7. Many the first couple of years was rough. That we were still getting some to Windows 7, Windows 8 areas, but that was breaking a lot of computers. And by the time I was getting out, we were just moving to 10. But again, breaking everything. It was a bad time. Those transitions were just very poorly handled, especially in the enterprise.
I think people underappreciate just how big and clever a job Apple did with the series. Because I mean, as I look into it, writing for AppleInsider about various anniversary things, you see the work to move from PowerPC, from Motorola 68000 to PowerPC to Intel to Apple Silicon. These are massive, massive things,
and nothing happened.
They handle it so well. You come away thinking it was nothing. And there's Microsoft showing. I mean, Microsoft of all companies having trouble with moving something. You think they know what to do. Microsoft, biggest company in the world at various times, but yeah.
I find gaming is such a specific weird topic for Apple because there's so much money in it. I think if Apple could figure it out, just put the money into it. That's all they really need to do. Have a gaming division, make Apple TV a home gaming console style system, and really just go for it. And I think they could execute. Get people to buy into these platforms and pay for these games, right? The magic that console and PC gaming has pulled over the last couple decades is convincing people that you can spend $40, then $50, then $60. Now, the latest Call of Duty, you can spend $100 on it, buying it brand new, right? That is the trick that they pulled over in the gaming sphere. People are desperate for their games, so they're going to be paying whatever they want. The opposite happened on the App Store. Apple, again, being one of the most popular gaming services on the planet with the iPhone, somehow did it in reverse. No one wants to pay anything. And if they do have to pay even $1, they're grumbling and might go find some ad-filled garbage because they would prefer that than pay the $1 to unlock the game, right? It's such a weird problem.
Yes, it's been like a race to the bottom from the moment the App Store came out, but it's still the case, I can't remember the figures, that iOS users and iPadOS users spend more money on apps by far than Android users ever do.
Which is why
Apple's
the gaming monolith.
Right, okay.
It's true.
I just find it funny because it's like on the one hand, Apple games nothing, and on the other, Apple games everything. It's just, how can it be both at the same time? But it is.
In the gaming world, there's actually mobile game is kind of a curse word because it implies that the game is either microtransactioned or let's take a game for example. A game is a mobile game versus a game is a full console game or whatever. How can you tell? All right, so there's a Drive Club game, I think, or one of those kinds of racing games on Apple Arcade. Every time you play it, a race and the track is built to be beat in about a minute and a half, right? You go play Gran Turismo, a race can take 15 minutes, right? It's just, there's or hours. There's a 24 hours Le Mans, right? Like you can actually play the 24-hour race on Gran Turismo. I mean, you can hit the pause button. Thankfully, you can't do that in real life.
Goodness, yeah.
But well, unless you're online, then that is interesting. They actually do have an online competition for that. But that's it. I digress. The issue is when a game is built, quote unquote, for mobile, the developer starts from a different standpoint. How can we make the gameplay cycle as short and repetitive and addictive as possible? So you don't turn on a game and jump into an overworld as a character and run around and interact with NPCs and go on quests in a mobile game, generally. I know there's exceptions. What you do is you go to a menu, select a level, and play through that level in about 2 to 3 minutes, get your 3-star score, and then jump to the next level. It's so dire, the difference between, right? And that's why people are begging for quote-unquote console games. That's why when Resident Evil and Assassin's Creed launched on iPhone, it was very different from what was already there, because it's the same game you play on the console. The graphics aren't as good as a PlayStation 5, but you load it up, you're in the world, and you're moving a character around and interacting and going on quests with barely a loading screen, with no quest map overview, selection screen, yada, yada, yada. Right? Like Mario from Super Nintendo would make an excellent mobile game today, because that's how it worked back in the day, or Sonic the Hedgehog, because games were very much more rudimentary, needed to take up less memory. So you would start in an overworld, select a level, beat it in about a minute and a half, and then go on to the next world. But the way those were designed somehow still felt better than today's modern games. Some kind of magic was lost in between. And anyone who's a gamer can tell immediately when something is, quote unquote, made for mobile. And that is still, to me today, feels disgusting, like every time I see it.
I mean, I have friends who write basically the plots and the dialogue for video games, but I've never really talked to them about the different platforms. Whenever Apple says, or anybody says console game, like, I just assume they meant very good graphics. It never occurred to me that there could be a material difference like that. You've managed to put me off mobile games, even when I wasn't in any way interested in them in the first place. So
there's good mobile games, right? There's good, you want to go play Bejeweled or Solitaire. You want to go jump into a level of Angry Birds, right? There are really good Cut the Rope, right? There's so many good mobile games, but the ones that I think are the biggest sin here, and we can move on, are the ones masquerading as a console game but are actually a mobile game, right? There's a recent Devil May Cry entry for mobile. It's pitiful gameplay repetition that was, whatever. It just did not land the sale for me, basically. Versus, like, there's been recent adaptations of different games. Like, there was a Sim City. I love Sim City. It's one of my favorite, Sims of all time. You're the mayor of a town and making decisions and building things to make citizens happy. Easy enough premise. They ruined it on mobile with microtransactions and timer clocks. Like, pay money, get sim bucks to make this town build faster. And it's like, no, this is disgusting. I hate everything about this. Let me pay $20 for this game and play SimCity 2000 like it's 1997. Please, for the love of God. But for some reason, that's why emulation is so important. And we can, like I said, we can move on. Emulation allows me to play real games on mobile, on phones that could easily run there, could easily be executed as an App Store game. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas for the PlayStation 2 is a playable mobile game on iPhone that you can download and play. It's the full game that you played on PlayStation 2 back in the day. And that go back in time and tell anyone that, they would think you're wild. But any Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, I can go and play Grandia, right? A bunch of these RPGs from the JRPG era, right? PS1 was magical for JRPGs, and you can play all of them now thanks to emulation, as long as you go the legal route and buy your own game and, yada yada, disclaimer. But you can do all of these amazing things through emulation on these platforms and play real games that honestly should have been there all along. And then because of this, my App Store games have kind of sat dormant. I've virtually ignored even Resident Evil and Assassin's Creed so I can go and play Pokemon Emerald. And I just find that fascinating.
I actually find all of this fascinating, which is, even I think that's a bit peculiar, because it's not like I'm proud of this. I don't happen to be a gamer for whatever reason. It just isn't my thing. I'm more into films and books and all sorts of stuff. I don't happen to go into sports or games, whatever. But this whole market, this whole industry, that's the word I'm looking for, I'm riveted to. But I'm going to confess something now, which I think you could probably guess, but I'm going to get it off my chest anyway. During the iPhone event next week, there will be a section about some game or other, and it'll be the best thing ever and all this great. And I'm sorry to say I won't intentionally do this, but my mind will wander totally, and I will not even know the name of the game afterwards. I think basically there's something wrong with me here, but the iPhone will plug something, and that is what will convince you to buy an iPhone 16 Pro Ultra Max Slim, won't it? The game.
The gaming industry is kind of in a tizzy right now. There's so many weird things going on, right? There's something called live service games, and Sony had one of the biggest failures known to man happen the other day. Like this is what's so interesting. Like you're completely unknown to this world. There's this game called Concord that took 7 or 8 years to build. Sony bought the rights to it 2 years into the development, and they made an entire cinematic movie like video for a trailer for the last big video game conference. They were hyping it up. This is going to be this next big thing. They made $20,000 and shut down 2 weeks into service. And offered everyone refunds because it was meaningless garbage. They made the same. They just made PUBG or whatever, right? They just made another Fortnite clone, and everyone called them on it, and that was it. It was over. And the gaming industry is in a big shift right now for so many reasons, right? People are trying to figure out where all of these new live service games fit in, microtransactions, how all this is supposed to work. And meanwhile, over here in our Apple sphere on this podcast, it's almost as if none of it's happening, because it's just this, Apple's built this wall around themselves where gaming just doesn't matter unless it's on the iPhone with a microtransaction.
Although there's a similarity here. That thing, this game they work on for years, whatever. I would have imagined if it's such an obviously rubbish game that somebody would have noticed along the way.
You would have thought.
We also, but Apple did fine Woven, which by all accounts, if you use that, you find out very quickly that it isn't any good. It stains, it cracks. I don't know what else it does, but basically it doesn't work. And kudos to Apple for replacing leather, all of it in one go. But somewhere during that process, they must have thought this isn't going to work. And did they just commit to it because they had no choice? Did the game people just figure, well, what else can we do?
I think they just they thought they took a risk. There's a common discussion in the gaming universe that Sony's lost its way. They used to have Sony after Nintendo. Sony was kind of the proprietor of mascot gaming. So Mario, of course, for Nintendo, Crash Bandicoot, and different things for Sony. But they kind of lost their way. Sly Cooper. They had 6 different mascots. They kept trying to bring new ones in, and then it kind of all fell apart. If you ever watch the excellent Mythic Quest on Apple TV Plus, there's a entire episode dedicated to this phenomenon called Dark Quiet Death, the 5th episode in the show. Completely standalone, perfect episode, probably best episode of television, honestly. I love it. Where the story of Sony and the mascotification and whatever was perfectly captured in an episode of TV, and I love it. But anyway, write your emails to William. He's the one who suggested we talk about
I'm going to
video
be.
games.
I did ask you about this, but The one I'm going to plug you up on, I believe everything you tell me about it because you're very persuasive and I'm totally trusting and I know nothing. But one episode of Mythic Quest being the best thing in television ever, you dare to say that on the week that Slow Horses is back?
Of course.
Well, we're done now. That's it. It's over.
It was a really well-written episode. I recommend you go read the script. But
And Only Murders in the Building has just come back as well. What's the matter with it? Come on. Okay. Wait.
I have heard that the new season isn't quite as... People are very upset that they use the Shining carpet as a wallpaper, and they're like, you didn't earn that.
Okay, well, that passed me by. It's very funny and deeply sad, amazingly moving. So, yes, catch up with it. Come on.
The saddest part of Only Murders is they renewed it for season 5, and Steve Martin says that this might be the end of his acting career. So once Only Murders is canceled, he might be done, yeah.
But at least that sounds like we get one more run of Only Murders after this. So I'm kind of happy and sad at the same time. It's a roller coaster. Yeah.
We've run a little long, and I feel like we talked about video games for a while. So let's have a quick lightning round, and then we can get to Apple Insider Plus. So,
okay. Thank you for all the gaming stuff, by the way. I really am fascinated by it, and I know you know this world much better than I do. So sorry if I asked you loads of questions there.
Any gaming people out there, please feel free to reach out and correct me. Some of this was off the cuff, right? So I understand that there may be some inaccuracies. We're all human. This podcast is about Apple, so diving into a history of video gaming like that can lead to some oopsies. But hey, I did my best. I've been absorbed in the world of gaming. Gaming history fascinates me, and but it's also not my primary method of study, so sometimes maybe I get things crossed. So please, of course, you can always write me or William, let us know what you thought of the discussion, and if you maybe want to hear more about games, we can always bring back a small gaming segment in other shows. I'm always happy to discuss what's coming to Apple Arcade or what Apple or games are announced. There's always something happening in the sphere. We just never touch on it because it's not really the Apple thing, but it is increasingly becoming so, as we discussed.
I think it's interesting how something like this is suddenly sort of sticking its head up over the ramparts, that even I'm noticing things going on with games. So I'm sure that's going to keep going. So I will be back asking you more. And if anyone wants to tell me what games I'm missing out and just pity me for whatever's wrong with me for not playing games, I quite understand that and will absorb suggestions, not prompt. After I've watched Ted Lasso. Yeah.
These stories will be in the show notes. So very quickly, no matter how many companies tell you that they're listening to you, they're probably not, unless you're on an Android phone. That's usually the conclusion we come to. Facebook, Instagram, I know they've had some weird quote-unquote bugs in the past where they leave the camera or microphone on. Separate issue. But there are ad companies claiming that they can listen to what you're saying and use that to target ads. It's really just not a thing on iPhone. If the microphone is active, you will see it active. There's no way to get around that. It is a hardware tie-in, basically. If the microphone is running, there will be a light on in the corner unless your phone is literally running malware. So every time you see one of these, just keep that in mind. Your phone is not listening to you. There's actually better and easier ways to target ads at you than trying to listen to every conversation you have. As eerie as it may be, and you're like, how did they know about this? How did they get this ad to me? I promise you, it's less clever, or it's more clever than listening to your microphone, but less complex than you think it is. But anyway, Apple Watch Ultra does not have a built-in camera. I don't know, honestly, where this one came from. Did you see this one come over?
Yeah, but it's a TikTok sensation. Well, sensation is a long word. For about an hour, TikTok was full of this, and there was the proof. Here's an Apple Watch. See, it's got a camera, but it wasn't an Apple Watch. It was a knockoff of it or something. So somebody knocked it off and fitted a camera in. So give them some credit there. They got more in than Apple did.
I still don't see the utility of a camera in a smartwatch ever.
No.
I've seen the selfie FaceTime camera you can attach to your Apple Watch, and even then it's just like, please, just you have a phone. I know the watch will ultimately wanted to replace the phone, but now we know that augmented reality is more likely to replace it than the watch ever could. It's always going to be some kind of companion because the phone camera is so important that I can't see a watch replacing that unless you can literally pop out a camera and lift it off of your wrist and start using it. It's just not going to happen. We're not, this isn't Inspector Gadget, but I did want to say I got a fun email this week. William, you covered the email, but how many fonts were in this one?
Oh yes, this phishing email. There were 14 fonts. And well, a font face is not just the typography of it. It is typography. It's not the family of the font. It's also the size, the weight, the color, whether it's italic or not. And so across all of that, it was 8 colors and 14 fonts, all from Apple.
Of course,
The
iCloud
people...
team. No, it was from the iCloud team, the iCloud Dash team, as we know them. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Who famously eschew all of Apple's fine-tuned aesthetic. I mean, Apple hires poets to write even its threatening emails, but these people were kind of children with crayons kind of thing.
This is the digital equivalent of cutting letters out of a newspaper.
Yes. Oh, do Mac still have the ransom font? I could have a need of that soon. Anyway, that's another story. Okay.
So the story here is a very poor attempt at iCloud phishing came through my inbox. Believe it or not, people will just read the title and think they're in danger and start clicking things. It happens all the time. Doesn't matter how ugly or stupid or misspelling the phishing scam is. Normal, regular people, everyday people fall for it all the time. So it's always good to sit down and have the talk with your family and let them know that that's just not how it works. Never click a link in an email. If an email comes in, if it's be it iCloud or your bank or something, and they say, you've been compromised, click this link, do whatever. Never click the link. Always go to the browser yourself, type in the URL, log in, and see if there's an issue. And maybe you change your password for good measure if you feel like something's wrong. But these kinds of emails come around all the time. I just found this one particularly entertaining. Just they really went all out on. You'll see a photo in the article. It's pretty excellent.
And we think it's all bad and wrong because it's bad and it's wrong and there's misspellings and the grammar's terrible and all this stuff. But those seem to be things that actually help get that sort of stuff through a spam filter somehow. Yes. So it's all. They're not stupid. They are really on the ball with this.
Couldn't the spam filter detect the number of fonts, maybe, and automatically discard it, right?
Oh, delete anything with any exclamation mark. I'd buy an add-on for Apple Intelligence that did that. Yes. Okay.
All right. Well,
you're not with me on that one. Okay. I'm sorry.
Goodness. But there are a lot of exclamation mark emails. But see, William, I don't know if you know this, but the millennial generation and younger are so terrified of human interaction that punctuation becomes part of our body language. So if you put a period, it's very serious. But if you put an exclamation mark, you let them know that you're also very friendly, right? So it's just a method of communication, of course.
Okay, and punctuation is as a part of language as anything else, so I'm not against that, but I have a special place in hell. Do you know that exclamation marks are also sometimes in printing, they're often called shrieks, and I think that's what they look like. Why are you shrieking at me? My very first ever editor on anything said to me that the reader should exclaim, not the writer, and I've never forgotten that. So, yeah.
Is it called an interrobang? That's a fun
yes,
one. Yes.
I just like the name. Yes, I wouldn't use it.
I have that programmed into my keyboard shortcuts, just so if I ever feel like I need to, I'm going to use the interrobang because it is in Unicode. But I think that is the show. We've gone a little over as is, and William has things to go yell at in British. So I think that's it. I do want to point out this is now September. We have entered this holy iPhone month of our Christmas holiday for nerds type stuff, but also it is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and I want to point out that our friends over at Relay FM every year, like clockwork, they do a fundraiser for St. Jude's. Go give them a donation. We're about to blow a bunch of money on technology, iPhones and Apple Watches and AirPods. Maybe spare them $5, $10, $100, whatever you can afford. It all helps. And they've done amazing work fundraising for this, it's just, it couldn't go to a better cause. Coming up with cures for, and methods for helping these sick children and around the world even. So I just recommend anyone listening here, maybe if you don't already have a Relay FM podcast where you're going, because all their shows are going to pitch it. Maybe if you're somehow outside of that bubble, I wanted to bring it up here just to say it's a good cause. Go check them out and maybe give them a little bit of your money. And with that, William, anything else?
Just the usual thing of where can we find you to complain about games?
Oh, well, so I'm on Mastodon. I've had a whole family situation and life just been impossible. So I've been less active than I like, but I am trying to come back to Mastodon a little bit more. It's pretty much the only social network I'm active on these days. So please reach out to me there at HillyTech. You can also find my email at the top of any article I've written. Same for William. And we're happy to receive your emails. Again, I know this was a bit of a gaming slog. I think we spent the second half of the show on that, but I found it kind of fun. I've said it before. I will start a gaming podcast whenever I find more hours in the day. William?
I might even listen to that for a bit, anyway.
For at least a moment.
Me? Yeah.
Yes.
Apple Insider, William at AppleInsider.com is the main one. I also do a monthly live 58 Keys YouTube thing, but you've just missed this month's one. First one of the month, you can point at me on the screen or something. But Apple Insider's the real one. Yeah.
I want to thank our sponsor, Oracle, one more time. And if you are a paid subscriber, you get the ad-free show and Apple Insider Plus, which is about to begin. And we're going to discuss this week our favorite or most memorable Apple event. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week after the Apple event. Woo!